Hello everyone, this is John Lee. In this video, we'll be focusing on an instructional strategy session. Our work here will be to learn about how to scaffold inquiry with elementary students. We also have a video that focuses on scaffolding inquiry with secondary students. In this session, we're going to do three things. We're going to review the purposes of scaffolding in an inquiry and describe some general approaches to scaffold elementary students' work with sources. So the emphasis will be on source work here. We're going to examine something called the artifact bag in the Museum of Me as an approach for introducing inquiry. And then we're going to look at some other approaches to introducing both scaffolding and inquiry. And we're going to do that without appearing to do any history or social studies. And I hope that you'll find that the strategies that I share with you are kind of fun, and it's just a neat way to get young kids involved in doing inquiry, like I said, without them even realizing they're doing something that's serious and disciplinary. We take our inspiration from the inquiry design model, which of course takes its inspiration from the C3 framework. The idea here is that we're beginning in the elementary grades, even in early childhood, kindergarten, first grade, to have kids do inquiry, but also to introduce them to the complexity of inquiry and to help them develop the capacity to work with sources, which is a touchstone of the inquiry design model. As you know, and you've probably learned by now, there's a method to the madness when it comes to designing inquiries. So when teacher designers sit down to make an inquiry, they follow a process. And really, all of this process is in play right now. We're really looking at the entirety of inquiry. We're not going to be talking so much about IDM and specifically about blueprints or this style of inquiry, as much as we are talking about the notion of students thinking in disciplinary ways and working with sources and building up the capacity and the intellectual skills that are needed to do inquiry. So let's go. Our first area of focus is just the general purpose of scaffold and some general approaches to scaffold elementary students' work with sources. I do want to say, there's two sides to scaffolding, and I think it's really important to say this. In one sense, we talk about students building knowledge, so we're scaffolding the process by which students build knowledge. On the other hand, we talk a lot about scaffolding teachers' design work. IDM is a teacher scaffold. It helps teachers make sense out of the complexity of teaching with inquiry. I'm going to be focused on the left side of this diagram today, on students and scaffolding students' work. So this is really about the translation and the movement of inquiry from theory and design to practice. This is really focused on the implementation in the classroom of inquiry. So as we shift to the classroom, we need to do a few things. First, and maybe most important, is we need to develop this mindset as teachers that we have to be explicit with our students about what sources do. Sources are central to an inquiry. And we really do have to be explicit about what the sources are doing with the inquiry and how students are going to, or how we're going to work with sources and with our students. What's this process going to look like? This is a quote that I think kind of sums this up. And you can read it here. I'm going to go ahead and read it. Sources yield evidence, but only when they are used as such to support a claim, back up a theory, establish a fact, or generate a hypothesis. And you've heard me talk about this on other videos, or you will, in this series about the importance of recognizing that sources have the information within them that can be used as evidence, and evidence is and becomes something real when it supports a claim. That is really complicated work. And what I would suggest is that to help kids understand what they're doing, be explicit with them. Use the words evidence and claim. Talk to them about what they're doing with sources. And we'll give you some strategies for doing that. Also, generally speaking, keep focused on these skills of inquiry. You're going to find these inside of all of the inquiries that are designed using IDM. And of course, the C3 emphasizes all these things. Asking questions, whether the teacher or the student asks them. Locating sources. Seeking evidence. Making inferences. Identifying perspectives and always cooperating or trying to strengthen the things that we say, the claims that we make in an inquiry. I believe with elementary kids it's important to start small. So while you're being explicit and you're being clear, it's also smart to start small. So one piece of advice I would give you is begin with a question. Inquiry begins with a question, but to be really laser focused on that and not, falling into, particularly with the younger kids, into the habit of thinking that kids have to know something to ask a question. So you got to do a big lecture or a lot of background work. Sometimes that's necessary. So I'm not going to be naive. You have to know something to know something. But it's also important to have that question and prioritize the question. Work with a limited number of sources. We talk a lot about that in IDM, really important with younger kids. Always provide scaffolds early on, always, always, always. And to keep this sort of mindset, this disposition. Inquiry is a mystery. And, kids are detectives, and helping them think that way and play roles is really important, because when you do that, then you can get them thinking in a mindset that they may already know, where they spend time looking at evidence, they're considering all sorts of angles, really paying attention to details. That's what detectives do. And they ultimately want to answer questions and figure things out. Here's a little thing that you can start off with kids. So this is just a very general idea, strategy. What can we learn from the things in our pockets, our wallets, our bags, anything? You reach in your pocket, if you're an adult, you might have a shopping list. That's what that is, or a receipt. There's a couple of receipts here. What can you find? There's stuff all over the place. There's things all over the place that can become evidence. And so that's a simple strategy that you can use with kids. Say, reach in your pocket. What do you have? Reach in your bag, in your backpack. Just find something laying around. And then start asking questions about it. What is this? Where did it come from? Who produced it? Why did they produce it? What does it tell us about the world around us? When was it produced? All of those are the kind of questions that we ask in an inquiry. And getting kids used to that, thinking about it, being interested, and really wanting to figure stuff out is a very important starting place when introducing kids to inquiry. Also remember that inquiry really involves source-based inferential work, and that's at the core, really, of history and social studies. So just think through these things. And this is another strategy you can do. You can get kids to come in and say, into class and say, all right, I just want you to think back over the last weekend or today, yesterday. Make a list of the stuff that you did, and then make a list of the records, the stuff that's left in the world that would tell us about what you did. Okay? The things that would help somebody else understand what you did yesterday or the day before or over the weekend. Provide kids examples, but this is a way for them to start to see that social studies and history and inquiry and all the inferences that we do really is part of our life. And so, that's something that you can do with kids on and off all the time. You can even keep records of it and have them play around. I'll actually show you a way that you can play around with that in a little bit more of a formal manner. One more thing, just keep some things to keep in mind. And this is important before an inquiry, but also during an inquiry and after, really. Always think about how we can help kids learn. They're doing stuff that's new to them, and we have to remember that. Our kids are doing stuff that's new to them. That's why they're in their class. That's why we do what we do, is to help them learn new stuff. Look for opportunities to create access, digging through your pockets, thinking about your life yesterday and what was left, and could be a record of what happened in your life. It's about creating access to inquiry and using our personal experiences to get into inquiry. Build scaffolds for kids. A great sequence to build scaffolds is the explain, demonstrate, and participate sequence. So think about how you can do that, where you explain something that's a scaffold or a way of doing stuff. You demonstrate to kids how it's done, and then you have them participate in the thing. Also work always, as you know, on building a climate of collaboration and cooperation where kids feel like they can get along with each other and they can do the stuff that they're asked to do. Okay, so let's shift gears now. In our second area of focus here, we're going to examine something called the artifact bag in the Museum of Me. And if you don't know about these, I think you're going to find that they're really fun. Now, I want to give credit where credit is due. Good friend of mine and a social studies professor named David Hicks is responsible for sort of developing the formal part of the strategy I'm going to show you. In fact, several of the things that I'm going to show you. So I do a lot of work with David, and he's at Virginia Tech, and his colleagues, and these are two sources that you can go pull out to get more details on what I'm going to show you. First, the artifact bag. Well, actually, the artifact bag in the Museum of Me. They're fun, and these are things that you can do with your kids tomorrow. If you haven't done something like this, it's fun, but it's also a great way to introduce the habits of mind that go into an inquiry. So here's the initial directions. Okay, you start off with a question. This isn't really a compelling question, but you could think of it that way because this isn't really a formal inquiry. But you ask a question or questions like this. Who is this person? What is their life like? What can I learn about them as an individual? Okay? And you're asking students to ask that question about themselves, who am I, and also about the students and the other students in the class, their peers. Who is this person, the person sitting next to me or across the table from me? So the process begins by students bringing to class 7 to 10 artifacts in a bag. You ask them to go home and just get some things that are from their room that they think are representative of who they are. And you can do this with adults too, it's fun. Just go get a bag, paper bag, fill the paper bag up with some stuff that you think represents you. Okay? The second thing that you would do is, for each one of those items, write down on a piece of paper, and I'll show you what it looks like, an explanation, okay, for each one of these items. So that's an exercise that students are going to do. And you have to support that a little bit with the younger kids to show them exactly how to do, and you can even create a template that they fill out. And then you're going to have kids write a brief narrative that explains how each of the artifacts say something about who they are. For example, this artifact describes, shows, reveals, illuminates, etc. Stuff about me. And you might even have kids do a Wordle. So if you want to do kind of an advanced version of this, you just plop the text from the narrative in the Wordle and create some word art that's going to be about yourself. So again, what you're asking kids to do are to get 7 to 10 artifacts, to write on a little note card an explanation of that artifact and what it says about them, and then to take those explanations and weave it into a narrative or a short story about themselves that is drawing on the artifacts. So you see what we're getting them to do without them knowing they're doing it. We're getting them to use that, to make claims and to use evidence, and the evidence comes from the artifacts. Okay? So that's how it starts, and you have kids do this. They're of course going to have to bring things in from home, but they could sit down and do the explanation cards and the narrative in class if you'd like for them to. Now, once that's done, then you can start the rest of the work. Well, actually, let me say something else about the explanation cards. I'm sorry. You could do these cards as PowerPoint slides if you have access to technology, but each one of these is going to be sort of a physical item, and it's going to go with an artifact that the student is going to set up. Okay? So sometimes students might say, oh, I got this great thing that I want to bring in, but it's my bike. And they can't get it in the bag. So have them take a picture of it. So that's another option to bring in images of the artifacts. This is what the card would look like. This is just an example. You can do this a lot of different ways, but you might have the kids just basically give them some directions. Describe where this artifact came from, where it was created, when it was created, why it was created, that kind of thing. And what's significant about it. Okay? So the first part is contextual as to when, where, what kind of stuff of the artifact item. The second part is more of an explanation about what that artifact says about me, if I'm the person with the artifact. What does it tell another person about me? Okay? So you're going to want kids to make these cards, and you're going to want them to bring the cards and the artifact, the physical artifact, or a picture of the artifact to class. And again, they can bring the artifacts and the picture to class and then fill out the cards in class. Now, what happens next is everybody has their artifacts in a bag with the explanation cards, and the explanation cards are sort of not in the bag, okay? The students are going to keep the explanation cards themselves. It's just the bags. Tell everybody in class, put all the bags in the back and scramble them and make sure that nobody knows whose bag belongs to whom. Have kids get up and go get a bag. Empty out the bag, lay it on the table. and you're going to ask kids to analyze the artifacts that are in the bags. And they can use these charts. These are 2 charts, and there's a lot of different kind of charts that you can use. But what these charts do is they give kids an opportunity to organize the information that they're gathering from the artifacts and the analysis that they're doing of the artifacts. Essentially, what they're doing is asking questions about the artifacts. They're asking questions like, what is this? When do I think it was created? Who do I think created it? What do I think this artifact tells me about the person that selected it? Because the person that selected it because they think it says something about themselves. And so you can give kids these types of tables or charts. You can make them yourself. The idea is to keep this sort of informal, but remember, it is a scaffold. So you're providing kids with support to do source work, to really ask important questions about these artifacts, which are sources, and then to extend that into claim making so that they say some things about their beliefs on what this artifact says about the person. Okay? So kids have gotten their bag. It's a bag from somebody else, but they don't know who it came from. They've gone through the artifacts. They've filled out their charts. They've done their analysis, and they know some things, or they think they know some things about the person that put that bag together. Now, this is all scaffolded. Okay? So keep that in mind. Kids, you've scaffolded their process because you've given them some charts and some graphic organizers to ask the questions about each one of the artifacts. What you're going to ask students to do next is to use the pieces of evidence that they've collected together and the charts they've created to start to weave together a narrative as concise as possible. And when they write the narrative, they're writing about the person that put the bag together. They're trying to tell the person's story. Who do I think this person is? And what you want to do with students with regard to scaffolding their writing is to give them some of the language that they might use in their writing, like this. This artifact suggests, boom, boom, boom. Or this artifact provides evidence that this person likes or dislikes or believes or enjoys or owns, blah, blah, blah. So that kids are being very explicit in saying what they think the artifact says about the person. Okay? And that's some classic scaffolding right there, where you give sort of starter statements and sentences to kids that they can fill in. The narratives, here's another little tip. The narratives might end with questions, 3 questions that you still have about the student. And that's an important part of historical thinking. We never want to be finished with this. We always want to leave the door open to additional investigation. So once that's done, what's happened is students have pulled together an artifact bag, they've done the cards on themselves, they've written their own narrative, they've given the bag, or somehow the bag that they created has gotten to another student, the other student's emptied that bag out, they've done their analysis, and they've written their own narrative about the person who the bag belonged to. Now it's time for the Museum of Me. The student takes their artifacts back and they set up an exhibit. The exhibit has the explanation cards and the artifact. It's laid out on the table, and then you have kids get up and walk around. And they walk around and they look for the person whose bag they had. They have in their hand the narrative that they wrote about the mystery person, and when they get to the exhibit, they have the narrative that was written by the person that put the bag together. And what you can have students do is then compare the 2 narratives. And what they're engaging in is historiography, and they don't even know it. They're looking at 2 interpretations of a person, and essentially the history of a person. One created by the person, the other created by a person who just had access to the artifacts. And so you've got kids doing really sophisticated work here. You're being explicit in your structure by giving them questions and starter statements, and you're beginning the process of helping kids understand that they're doing some pretty sophisticated work in history and social studies. The Museum of Me, here's some exhibits that were set up, so you can see kind of what they look like. Okay, so that's the example of the artifact bag in the Museum of Me. I have one more thing I want to share with you, and these are some other approaches to introducing scaffolding and inquiry. And again, doing this without appearing to really be, obvious about it. And answering this question, how do I design a scaffolded task? So we're going to look at another one. This also comes from David. It's called The Mystery of Sam Smiley. And David talks about, again, this being introducing inquiry without appearing to really do it. And this is really good for even younger kids, although there is some sensitivity around it because it's about a case, and in the case, the the person that the kids are investigating dies. So you want to make sure that you've, covered all your bases to make sure that your kids are ready for something like this. This particular activity is actually part of historical scene investigation, which is a project that was developed by Kathy Swan, my partner on this, and of course you're listening to Kathy's videos as well. And Kathy did this with her another colleague, Mark Hofer. And so if you just Google historical scene investigation, you're going to find their work, and within that you're going to find this particular activity, the Mystery of Sam Smiley. And it's also online at this URL. So Sam Smiley is, you set it up like this, a body is found, you're detectives, you're going to go figure this stuff out, you're going to get a lot of clues and information. If you go online, you get all the clues that can be given to kids. It includes, this is just sort of a screenshot of some of the clues, all these artifacts, these pieces of information that have been collected about the day that Sam Smiley had. And so he had this day leading up to this tragic event where he died. And included among the evidence and the artifacts are diagrams, information that the police collected, all sorts of stuff. And what you ask kids to do is to analyze all this information using these charts called SCIMC charts. And SCIMC is an acronym. It stands for Summarize, Contextualize, Infer, and Monitor. Actually, Summarize, Contextualize, Infer, Monitor, and Cooperate. And that's 5 things that kids do when they analyze sources. So you give kids these charts, and they use the charts to analyze each one of these pieces of evidence. So they'll do each one of them. And this is a great opportunity to jigsaw. You could have a group of 5 and divide up the artifacts or the evidence. And each kid does a couple, and then they pull it all together and look at all of it. And this is another way to display the chart where kids are looking to summarize the information, to contextualize it and ask this question: when, why, where, and how was the source produced, to infer from it what does the source suggest, and to monitor. Then, when you get everybody together, or if one student is doing all of it, they bring all their evidence together and they cooperate. What are the similarities between the sources, the differences, accumulated conclusions, and other things that you would need to know? Once all of that stuff has been pulled together, then you have students hazard a guess. What happened to Sam Smiley? And it's fun. I encourage you to download it and play around with it. Certainly adapt it if you want the mystery to be about something else. If there's some sensitivity around this particular topic, then that's totally understandable. What you're going to want to do along the way, though, and this is super important, is to have reflection and build it in. To kind of have that be a normal part of the discourse in the classroom. This whole thing, Mystery of Sam Smiley, the whole artifact bag and Museum of Me, it's not about the product. It's not even an activity. It doesn't really matter what the details of the evidence is. The point is that kids are engaging in a process. They're engaging in a historical inquiry process, and they're sourcing. And so you want to put these questions in front of them. How did you get to your conclusions? How did you use the sources? Have kids be accountable. What strategies did you use? So they know what they are. They're accounting for their strategies. They're thinking about their thinking. That's going to strengthen the kids' capacity and their ability to do inquiry later. And so we use this acronym, pause on our process, and you can do it with kids and tell them, all right, we're going to pause on our process. Everybody stop. And you pose some questions to them. And of course you want to, acronym this thing up like you do all of them. And when you acronym up, pause on our process, kids are going to laugh. So that'll be an opportunity for you to have some fun with kids. Okay, so all of this stuff relates to IDM. Of course, this is C3 Teachers. A lot of the stuff that I showed you is on other websites. I encourage you to go back in this video and access those things. Also remember that we have stuff on the Hub. In fact, this video is on the Hub. So hope this was useful and you enjoyed it. As always, please let me know if you have any questions. You can reach me via email. The email is on the Hub, and I'll be happy to help you out. Thanks a lot.